And the Hooghly River is probably the most important thing in shaping the history of Kolkata, because right here was one of the first ever trade posts by the East Indian Company way back in the day. In case if you're wondering why there are huge buildings dedicated to British empresses and why I'm talking about the East Indian Company, which is essentially a British company, here's a really quick but important history lesson for you. So up until the end of, let's say, the 16th, 17th century, this whole area, the Indian subcontinent, was controlled by the Mughal Empire. But as the early 18th century was starting, that Mughal Empire was declining in strength. This was becoming basically a fractured empire with not a lot of control and a lot of diffusion of power. That's when this company called the East India Trading Company, or the British East India Trading Company later, came in and started to set up trading posts. And they're not the only ones, by the way. There were trading companies by the French and by a lot of other countries in Europe. And these were private companies that were sponsored by the government, but they were private at the beginning of it. So these companies were laying down trading posts everywhere, but they laid a very important one here. And then they went on to buy on 3 villages that were here and combined them to make the first ever city of Kolkata, let's say, and they started developing it as a proper city. And don't get me wrong, people were living here for 2,000 years before that, but the modern day city of Kolkata has really its root to that colonial time when this East India Company set base over here. And you know how much the British were just involved in building the city can be seen from the names of places. If you go to any other big city in India or even Bangladesh that used to be under the Brits, at least the places and the streets sound like the local language. You know, over here, streets are called things like Park Street or Central Avenue. That doesn't sound Bangla or Hindi at all. And this company went on to do some pretty ridiculous things. They grew so much, they expanded to such an extent that by the end of the 1700s, this company was doing half the trade in the whole world. Half the trade. They're responsible for it. That's freaking crazy for one little company. They colonized not just the Indian subcontinent, but parts of Southeast Asia and even parts in the Persian Gulf. And you know, eventually this company wasn't even a company anymore. It just became a managing agency for the British government. But in order to make its first trading post last here and to protect it from attacks by the French or just by people in the Mughal Empire that didn't like them, they had to build a fort, which was very hard to do until they finally did it a little further behind me there, 200 meters away. So I wanted to show you guys the fort, that's Fort Williams, that the Brits built in the 1690s, which is 500 meters that way. But I was trying to enter and I just found out that that is definitely not a tourist area because that's still a fort inside a military complex and I can't get in.